Perpetual Poverty in the Eyes of the Perceiver by Clara O. and Sidney Fleming. Perpetual, defined by Merriam-Webster as an adjective that describes something that continues forever and occurs indefinitely. Other than for alliteration, why attach this adjective to the word poverty?
Well, what is poverty? With the most basic Google search, poverty will be defined as the condition in which a person does not have enough of something, usually money, to meet their most basic needs. However, this raises the question of what counts as a basic need, and how has that changed over time? And what if we ask the general public what they perceived poverty to be and look like? Well, we would have to say that their responses would vary because, ultimately, the assumptions people make about poverty are in the eyes of the perceiver. Nonetheless, it is important to consider these perceptions when defining poverty because their accuracy and wording will influence how others view and treat the impoverished.
Given this, how do we define poverty? Well, we are well aware that it is most difficult and challenging to define poverty in a way that addresses all factors and facets of life. To the best of our ability, we believe poverty is the condition of having inadequate income, resources, and capabilities that enable individuals to live an objectively fulfilling life and receive societal respect and dignity. Similarly, we are quick to acknowledge that there is no perfect measure for poverty. However, between the various poverty measures being used today, we believe that the SPM is the best measure for poverty because it defines resources and thresholds in a measurable way that considers most of the contributing factors to poverty.
So what is the SPM? SPM stands for the Supplemental Poverty Measure, and it is based on the concept of taking a person's pre-tax annual income and adding in any non-cash government benefits while subtracting out any non-discretionary expenses, such as taxes or out-of-pocket medical expenses. After this is calculated per person or household, it is compared to the threshold, which stands at 83% of the median household expenses on food, clothing, shelter, and utilities, or FCSU. In terms of defining poverty, the SPM allows us to look at a household's financial position in a detailed yet objective fashion that takes into account their unique situation while providing a fair and consistent method of measuring their poverty. This method is a supplement to the OPM, the official poverty measure, which is based on weighing a family's annual pre-tax income against 3 times the cost of a basic basket of food for a family.
For example, let's look at 2 families. They are under the same threshold, and these are their incomes, government benefits, and out-of-pocket medical expenses. According to the OPM, the first family would be living in poverty, but not the second family. However, under the SPM, non-cash government benefits and non-discretionary medical expenses are calculated into the poverty measure, and the second family would be living in poverty, but not the first. While this is a basic example that does not encompass all factors, it gives a general idea of why the SPM is beneficial in determining poverty in a household.
As we just discovered, there are key pros and cons to both approaches. While the OPM only takes into account a family's pre-tax income and government cash income, the SPM takes into account a family's pre-tax income, government cash and non-cash benefits, geographic location, and non-discretionary expenses. These differences resulted in each family being considered as in poverty, but under different approaches. This example is one of the reasons why poverty is difficult to measure and why our present methods are imperfect. Despite this, we feel that the SPM better encapsulates a family's true monetary resources and is the better measure of poverty.
Another approach to how poverty can be measured is by looking at the amenities a person or household has. Rector's argument does just that. The typical American view of poverty is of extreme poverty, where those in poverty are homeless and starving. But Rector points out that most Americans living in poverty are far from that. In fact, he points out how poverty is not as bad as it is portrayed to be, and that it is often overestimated. To prove his point, he provides examples of how many different amenities and the rates at which they are present in poor households.
For example, one piece of data shows that the amount of poor households with refrigerators is 99.6%. Though this leads you to believe that the families with refrigerators may not be truly living in poverty, it does not tell you where the refrigerator came from, what state it is in, what is inside the fridge, how many people are using that fridge, or if someone has the means to use it. It could have come with an apartment or been donated, and the family may not even be able to afford stocking the fridge or using it.
There are many examples of things this statistic doesn't tell us, and they are all reasons why Rector's argument lacks necessary information to truly judge how a person or family is doing based on the amenities they have. However, we recognize that there are other factors aside from physical resources that influence poverty as well. such as a person's educational achievement and bodily health, which is why we think the capabilities approach is also an important factor in determining poverty.
The capabilities approach. The capabilities approach is a theory developed by Amartya Sen and later added onto by Martha Nussbaum in her list of central capabilities. It is comprised of functionings and capabilities. Capabilities are the total set of genuinely possible and achievable doings and beings an individual can have, including their opportunities and freedoms. Functioning exists within capabilities as they are achieved capabilities, meaning that they are an individual's actual doings and beings. For example, Bob knows how to drive and has a car, giving him the opportunity and the freedom to drive. However, these are only his capabilities. Bob actually getting in his car and driving to Kroger to get groceries for the week is an example of his functionings.
Additionally, the capabilities approach is comprised of combined capabilities, which include internal capabilities and external contexts, such as social, political, and economic climates. This is important to consider because people oftentimes have knowledge but not the ability to act upon it in society, or the ability to act but not the knowledge to inform their decisions. This relates to substantial freedoms, which are opportunities that are realistically attainable. Just because someone has access to goods and services does not always mean that it is attainable for them. If there is a shelter that is giving out food donations they have received, individuals have access to that food. But if they do not have time, transportation, or cannot afford to get to the shelter, they would not be able to attain the food. This shows substantial freedoms because individuals may have many opportunities, but they may not be helpful if they are not attainable.
Now, Nussbaum's list of central capabilities helps us understand exactly which capabilities are generally prioritized and deemed most significant in providing individuals with what she phrases as a good human life. Her list contains 10 core capabilities. Of these 10, Nussbaum places emphasis on practical reason and affiliation because a key core value of understanding poverty is to do it in a way that respects people and their dignity. Both affiliation and practical reason stress the importance of being treated with self-respect and dignity and forming our own notion of good and holding ourselves to it.
So how does knowing this contribute to our understanding and definition of poverty? In our definition of poverty, we said that income, resources, and capabilities were the main factors that contribute to an individual's ability to live a fulfilling and dignified life. We believe that capabilities are a necessary factor to include in the definition of poverty because, as the capabilities approach has demonstrated, the ability of individuals to turn their capabilities into functionings can be limited by many variables, and we cannot force people to act a certain way without violating their dignity. Since capabilities vary from person to person, it is a facet of life that heavily influences the way individuals in poverty live. Ultimately, to recognize people's dignity, we must respect how people choose to live their lives.
Income and resources are also key components in our definition of poverty because it is necessary to evaluate a household's relationship to resources and the amount of money they have to obtain their basic needs. Income is important because there's an imperfect and complicated relationship between income deficit and capabilities deficit. Having insufficient income would have implications on capabilities and the ability for people to live a dignified life. Similarly, poverty is the lack of central capabilities due to a lack of materialistic and financial resources. Yes, money matters, but seeing the condition of how people are actually living matters too.
So, at the end of the day, income, resources, and capabilities are all contributing factors to the definition of poverty, and that is why we define poverty as the condition of having inadequate income, resources, and capabilities that enable individuals to live an objectively fulfilling life and receive societal respect and dignity.
With that in mind, we believe that the best way to measure poverty is the SPM because it defines resources and thresholds in a measurable way that considers most of the contributing factors to poverty.